Hello and welcome to the second video of creating a machine learning review widget. So the idea of this is we've gone onto a website that sells WordPress plugins. We've looked at what's popular and commercially sells well, and now we're going to be creating a basic idea with some added features so that you have a project in your portfolio that it can be used commercially or sell commercially. So in this video we're going to be focusing on a number of things, but the main thing that we're going to be looking at is how to query the WordPress database to see if our table exists. So let's have a first look at what we'll be creating. Okay, so what we're going to be doing, or what we're going to be making in this project, is we're going to be making a review plugin. We're going to have a menu on the dashboard, so we'll create that. If you look at that, there'll be a number of buttons. So the first button will be adding the table. So if you click that, it will, once done, it will redirect back to the main dashboard. But we look back and the table will be successfully added. And we can then add trial data. So if we run the trial data, again it will go back to the dashboard and we'll have the trial data, and then we'll be looking at the data here. If we have more data, we can then run the machine learning. So what will happen is there'll be a full comment, but then from that full comment we'll have like these summary quotes that we'll get from the machine learning, and then we'll have a positivity ranking for each comment. So if we go to the appearance, and we make sure that the review widget is there, it will have this comment section here at the top. So this will be a summary. For example, that's the summary of the quote, or that we'll get from machine learning. That will be the name of the person who made it, and this will be the quote here, the full quote. You can cycle through all the quotes, or you can allow it to go iterate through it by itself using the animation, and then we'll have a like button here. Okay, so that's the basic template. Let's look at the task we have today. Okay, so the 5 tasks that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating our PHP class. I'm going to be adding in our object properties now, or the class properties. Have a think about how you want to design and what kind of properties you want to add. I'm going to be making our constructor, and then I'm going to be adding one method that checks to see if our WordPress table exists or not, and then checks that return value to see if it matches it. Because then what we can use, if you remember back to my template, is that I can create those table alerts to see if the table's been added, to see if the data's been added, and things like that. Okay, so stop the video and have a think about how you want to do these tasks. Try and do these tasks for yourself, and then watch how I've done them. Okay, so let's start. Like always, in all of my projects, I'm going to use OOP, Object-Oriented Programming. So the first thing we need to do is go into the contents. We're going to go into the plugin files, and I've already created a PHP file for our plugin. If you don't know how to do that, I suggest you look at my first video, and it just tells you the basics of creating that plugin file. So if we open it up, we have the basic information, and I'll leave the video of the link to my first video describing what all this is in the comments below. So we can go straight on to creating our class. So we're going to be creating a class just using in PHP that class keyword with the name of our class, which will be review. So we can quickly tick this off. The second one, hopefully you've had to think about what kind of things that you want to put in there, and how that can help you design your object. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing I want to do is, if you remember that example, I had these alerts, and so I'm going to put a variable table alert in there just to remind me that's what I want to do. Again, I'm going to be getting a lot of data from the database, and so I'm going to be putting the array into, it's going to be an array within an array, and so I'm going to be making that variable, so this array will contain multiple arrays within it. Then I want to have a think about what kind of table I want to create. So, you know, I'm going to be in numerous times throughout the plugin, I'm going to be requesting information from the table or inserting something from the table. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to, in my head, design the table that I want, and then make the variables, so then I can just call it from here, and so I'm not repeating the information again and removing that potential issue where I misspell something, or something happens and I'm not calling, or like well, basically I misspell something and there's just errors and I can't find it. So if I just put it here once, then I can repeatedly call it from there. And then I've got those buttons that I've created, and I'm just going to add those, the names of those buttons and what they're doing up here again, just so in my head I know what I'm doing. So again, this is the basics of our arrays, or the basic properties of our class. It'll help me look at it and think, what do I want to do with this object? It will probably change quite a lot through the video. I might add stuff, I might take stuff away, but they're the properties that I think I might need while I'm making it. So there we go. Now we need to just create our constructor. Now remember that constructor is the function that is automatically called when we create our class. So all we need to do is put function and construct, and that will, when we create this class, that will create that constructor. So what I'm going to be doing is, I've made my constructor. Now, instead of in the constructor, I'm writing the code to check the WordPress, to query the WordPress. I'm going to create another method. So in the constructor, I'm just going to say, look, call this method, and then down here, I'm going to be adding the code for that method. So hopefully that just tidies it up slightly. So what I'm going to be doing is I need to now create that method. So I just put the function and then just make sure it is the same. Yeah, so make sure it's the same as this method. Do remember this keyword is referring to the parent of it. So here we're referring to the class here, which is review. And so what we're saying is, like, we're going to call the check table within the review object, which is this one. So have not created that yet. I haven't done the query, so that's what we need to do now. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to call this WordPress database object, and this is something that's already exists within WordPress. And so what you can do is, once you call it, you can use its methods to interact with that database. So it's really important you get familiar with the methods that WordPress database can do. So for example, the first method that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using the WordPress database Base Prefect Method. And what that does is it looks in that WordPress configuration PHP file to find out what the WordPress, or what your WordPress's prefix is. So most tables, when you first do it, you know, in WordPress, they'll have, your table will have like WP underscore. However, you are able to change that. And so you don't really know, if you are going to sell your plugin, you don't really know what their table, or what the prefix for their tables are. They might have multiple, they may have changed it, but you want your table that you're going to add to their WordPress environment to be the same. So what you can do is you can use this Base Prefect to look at that config file, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. Okay, so if we go back to our WordPress files and we look at this WP config and we open it up, there's a lot of information here, but we're going to go down to that, here you go, that table prefix, and it's saying basically they might have multiple kind of installations in one database. So they might have a website that has these databases or these tables for this, these tables for that, and they might split it up with the prefix. So they might have multiple ones of that. So what this Base Prefect method does is it goes into that file and checks what that table prefix is, and then adds it on to our table name. So I'm just adding that on to our table name. But that still doesn't check the database for our query. So we need to add a query that queries that database. Okay, so if we add in, we could use the WordPress database method prepare. So we've got this is our query that we're going to ask about in the database, and this is a variable that we're placing into the query. So this prepared method is brilliant if you're allowing the user to enter something into the SQL query, because what this is called a placeholder, and it's saying we expect a string variable to be inserted in here. So this must be a string and it'll be inserted into there. So this prepare method for the WordPress database, it's for an SQL query when you're asking the user to insert something in there. However, we aren't doing that. We don't have to be worried about the user being malicious. We could just directly insert our SQL query straight into it. So we're going to show the tables that are like the name here. Very importantly, the like is expecting it to be in a quotation. So even though I've done a double quote here and I've done a single quote here, just to make sure that there is a quotation mark around our variable. We still haven't queried this, which we've just prepared our SQL. So we still haven't queried our WordPress yet, because what we need to use that WordPress database to check our database for that table. So if we go down, there you go. We use this get variable, or the get var method from the database to query this. Now, this get var is one method, and there are many methods to retrieve information from the database. So the get variable gets one value. So you have to understand what you think will be returned before you decide which method you use for querying the database. So we only want one method, or we want only one value returned, which is the name of our table. So what we're saying is, look, query the database with this value, and then if it's the same as this name here, then do the if statement. And what our if statement is, it's just going to be saying, if it's found, set the table alert to false, else then it must not be found, therefore set the table alert to true. So we need to make sure we close up our class. Is that closed? Okay, that's done. There you go. For some reason that wasn't working. Excellent. So making sure all of those are closed. Brilliant. So we've queried the WordPress with this. and then we've checked that value against the table. It should be returning that table name, and we're checking that value is the same as our table name, and then we're saying it's true or false depending on that. So we've done all our 5 tasks. So here are the questions that I'm going to be asking you. Pause the video, have a think, answer them in your own head, and then click play, and I'll go through the answers. Okay, so what does the wpdb object allow us to do? Well, let's have a look at the WordPress development website, and let's see what kind of methods we are able to call once we've initialized that object. So if you go to the website, it describes a little bit about the object here, the WordPress database access abstract object. Let's go down to common tasks, so we can select a variable. So if we want to get one value from the database, we can use the get var. We can select a row, so if we want to get one row from the database, we can use the get row value or the get row method. Again, there's some examples. If you want to select a column, you can get the get column. If you want to just get multiple results, you can say get results. If you want to insert a row, you can say insert, replace. So you can see there's quite a lot of things that we use this for, so it's an important little object that we need to get used to. The second question, why did we use that base prefect method? Well, that goes into the config files for WordPress and finds the table prefix that you've assigned it, so it does it automatically. This means that you can, if you change this, for example, in the config thing, the plugin will still work because it will take this prefect. So it's a good idea to have an understanding of all these base prefects and how you can find them. So it's a good idea to have a look at that config method and start understanding how you can make sure that, you know, regardless of the environment, as it were, you can pull information from that local WordPress environment and then still use and it will still work. Okay, so how many values are returned with the get var method? Well, only one is returned. If you wanted more, if you wanted to return, like, let's say a record, you would say get row. If you wanted to do multiple rows or multiple values, you could say get results. So there's quite a few things. Number 4, write the SQL to check if a table exists. Now, if we knew exactly the information, so if we're hard coding it so it does not change, the user has no input, we can do it like that. Do remember, importantly, you see that the value, the variable, has to be in quotation marks. So what I've done is I've set them out with the double quotes, and then with the variable I've done it in single quotes. So without those single quotes, there will be an error in the SQL query that we send to the database. So it's important you still have those quotation marks and they're correct. You know, how would the code be different if the user wants to check if a table exists? Well, if the user is allowed to enter information into our SQL, this can be a little bit dangerous. So what WordPress does is it has a method called prepare, and we can use it to create a placeholder, and then we use a comma and we add our variable afterwards. And what that does is it allows us to, or it allows the prepared method to insert that variable into the SQL, and it does all sorts of checks. And as you can see, that percentage mark with that S, that's a data type check, so it's saying it has to be a string that enters into there. Okay, so they are all those questions. If you manage to get all of them right, then you have a good grasp of that database and the methods that we're going to be using. So hopefully you were able to see the basic requirements of our project by using the by looking at the properties that we've created. You're also able to query the database now for the results, as well as general variables, or whether you want to query it with hard code where it doesn't change, or if you want the user to insert is their own variable, that you're able to do that. If you want to have a look at some of the other projects we've created, take a look at the Matrix animational plugin or the Valentine's Day plugin. These are more animational ones, so if you're interested in learning a little bit more about animation in WordPress, have a look at these. If you found this video helpful anyway, please subscribe or leave a comment or a like, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.